Most people in Hilltop, North Dakota, thought Jake Hughes was just another small-town electrician who fixed broken outlets and rewired old houses. But they had no idea this quiet widower possessed the engineering knowledge to revolutionize electrical infrastructure. When Jake claimed he could design a floodproof electrical grid to save their chronically flooded town, the mayor and city council laughed him out of the room. Frank Barron, the established electrical contractor, publicly bet him he couldn't make it work. When the worst flood in Hilltop's history struck without warning, every conventional electrical system failed catastrophically, plunging the hospital, emergency services, and evacuation routes into dangerous darkness. But Jake's revolutionary grid system, the one they had all ridiculed, became the only thing standing between the town and complete disaster. This is the story of how a dismissed small-town electrician risked everything to prove that innovation and determination could triumph over skepticism and greed, saving not just his community, but revolutionizing emergency infrastructure across the country, all starting with a simple bet and a man who knew more than anyone gave him credit for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sycamore Lane as Jake Hughes pulled his weathered pickup truck to a stop outside the municipal center. The 42-year-old electrician sat for a moment, his calloused hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the imposing brick building that housed Hilltop city government. His dark hair showed streaks of premature gray, and his flannel shirt bore the permanent creases of a man who worked with his hands for a living. The truck's radio crackled with the morning weather report mentioning possible storms later in the week. Jake climbed out of the truck, his work boots crunching on the gravel parking lot. He carried a thick manila folder under his arm, its contents representing months of careful calculations and detailed planning. The folder looked worn from handling, its edges soft with repeated opening and closing. As he walked toward the building's entrance, he passed other citizens heading to work, most of whom nodded politely but without much recognition. To them, Jake Hughes was simply the local electrician who showed up when their power went out. Inside the municipal center, the weekly city council meeting was already underway. The council chamber occupied most of the building's main floor, with rows of folding chairs facing a raised platform where 5 council members sat behind a long table. Mayor Robert Dean, a heavy-set man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, presided from the center seat. His navy suit looked expensive compared to the casual attire of most attendees. "Next on the agenda," Mayor Dean announced, consulting his papers, "we have citizen concerns and proposals." Jake made his way to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum floor. Several dozen residents occupied the folding chairs, including familiar faces from around town. Frank Barron sat in the 3rd row, his arms crossed over his broad chest. The established electrical contractor wore a pressed shirt with his company logo embroidered on the pocket. His dark eyes tracked Jake's movement with obvious skepticism. "Mayor, Dean, council members," Jake began, standing beside the podium but not stepping behind it. His voice carried the steady cadence of someone accustomed to explaining technical problems to worried customers. "I'm here to propose a comprehensive upgrade to our electrical infrastructure that would eliminate the chronic power failures we experienced during flooding." Councilmember Patricia Taylor, a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s, leaned forward in her chair. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a burgundy blazer that suggested she took her role seriously. "Mr. Hughes," she said, "we appreciate your concern, but infrastructure upgrades require significant capital investment. Our budget committee has already reviewed several proposals from established firms." Jake opened his manila folder and withdrew a set of blueprints. The papers rustled as he unfolded them, revealing detailed electrical schematics covered with handwritten notes and calculations. The drawings showed elevation diagrams, circuit layouts, and equipment specifications that would have impressed any electrical engineer. "I've designed a flood-resistant grid system that would cost 60% less than conventional upgrades," Jake explained, holding up the blueprints. "The key is elevating critical components above historical flood levels and using waterproof housing for ground-level equipment." Mayor Dean squinted at the papers from his position at the council table. His expression suggested polite interest mixed with doubt. Behind him, a large window overlooked the Basin District, where several streets showed water stains on building foundations from repeated flooding over the years. "These are impressive drawings, Mr. Hughes," the mayor said, "but electrical infrastructure design requires licensed engineers and certified contractors. We can't risk public safety on amateur proposals." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Several residents nodded, while others whispered among themselves. Jake's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady as he responded. "My calculations account for load distribution, emergency redundancy, and National Electrical Code requirements," he said. "I can provide technical specifications that meet or exceed industry standards." Frank Barron stood up from his seat, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. The contractor's presence commanded attention. His reputation built on decades of successful projects throughout the region. His company trucks were familiar sights around Hilltop, and several council members had hired his services for personal work. "With all due respect, Jake," Frank said, his tone patronizing, "rewiring houses and installing ceiling fans doesn't qualify someone to redesign municipal infrastructure. The city needs professionals, not hobbyists." Several audience members chuckled, and Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had expected skepticism, but the dismissive tone stung more than he had anticipated. His fingers tightened on the blueprints as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I understand your concerns," Jake replied. "But this system would prevent the kind of failures we saw during last spring's flooding. The hospital lost power for 6 hours, and the emergency services building went dark completely." Dr. Amanda Abel, who had been sitting quietly in the back row, spoke up from her seat. The emergency room physician at Hilltop Regional Hospital was well respected in the community, and her presence at the meeting carried weight. Her scrubs suggested she had come directly from work. "Jake's right about the hospital," she said. "We had patients on life support running on backup generators. If those had failed, we could have lost lives." Mayor Dean nodded gravely, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. The hospital's power problems during floods were well documented, and everyone present understood the potential consequences. However, his expression remained doubtful as he looked back at Jake's blueprints. "Dr. Ebel raises valid concerns," the mayor said. "But addressing them requires proven solutions from established contractors. Mr. Barron's company has handled municipal projects across 3 counties." Frank stepped into the aisle, his confidence evident in his posture and tone. He gestured dismissively toward Jake's blueprints, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to winning contracts and managing large projects. "I've been in this business for 25 years, Frank declared. Floodproofing electrical systems isn't as simple as moving some equipment higher up. There are complex integration issues, regulatory compliance requirements, and warranty considerations that require professional expertise. Jake felt the room's sentiment shifting against him. The logical arguments he had prepared seemed to carry less weight than Frank's established reputation and professional credentials. Still, he pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that his design could genuinely solve the town's chronic problems. "I'm willing to demonstrate the system's effectiveness," Jake said, his voice growing stronger. "Build a test section in the Basin District and monitor its performance during the next flood event." Patricia Taylor exchanged glances with other council members before responding. Her tone suggested patience, wearing thin, and her body language indicated she considered the discussion concluded. "Mr. Hughes," she said, "we appreciate your civic spirit, but the city can't experiment with essential infrastructure. We have liability concerns and insurance requirements that demand proven contractors and certified systems." The other council members nodded in agreement, and Jake realized his formal presentation was failing. The technical merits of his design seemed irrelevant compared to bureaucratic considerations and professional politics. He folded his blueprints slowly, his mind racing for a different approach. "What would it take to convince you?" Jake asked. "What proof would satisfy your concerns about the system's viability?" Frank Barron laughed, the sound carrying a mixture of amusement and derision that drew more chuckles from the audience. His confidence had grown throughout the exchange, and he sensed an opportunity to definitively end the discussion while reinforcing his own position. "You want proof?" Frank said, spreading his arms wide. "Fine. If you're so confident in your amateur hour designs, put your money where your mouth is. Build your flood-proof system and guarantee it works better than professional installations." Mayor Dean held up his hand. Sensing the conversation moving toward confrontation, his role required maintaining decorum during public meetings, and he could see emotions escalating on both sides of the debate. "Gentlemen," the mayor said, "let's keep this professional. Mr. Hughes has presented his proposal, and we will take it under advisement with other infrastructure recommendations." But Jake's frustration had reached a breaking point. Months of work on his design, years of watching preventable power failures endanger his neighbors, and now public dismissal of his expertise combined to override his usual caution. "I accept your challenge, Frank," Jake said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet chamber. "I'll build a working demonstration of flood-resistant electrical When the next flood comes, we'll see whose system keeps the lights on." The room fell silent. Council members exchanged uncertain glances while audience members leaned forward in their seats. Frank's confident expression faltered slightly as he realized the discussion had moved beyond rhetoric into actual commitment. "You're talking about significant time and expense," Frank said, his tone more cautious now. "Are you prepared to back up that confidence with real consequences?" Jake looked around the room, seeing faces that reflected doubt, curiosity, and skepticism in equal measure. His son, Tommy, would think he was crazy for taking such a public risk. His sister-in-law, Angela, would worry about him jeopardizing his business reputation. But something deeper than pride drove his response. "If my system fails during the next major flood, I'll close my business and leave town," Jake said. "But if it works better than conventional installations, the city considered my proposal for the full municipal upgrade. Mayor Dean's eyebrows rose at the dramatic stakes Jake had just proposed. The chamber remained silent as everyone processed the implications of the challenge. Frank looked surprised by Jake's willingness to risk everything on his untested design. "That's quite a gamble, Mr. Hughes," the mayor said slowly. "Are you certain you want to make such a public commitment?" Jake's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The walk from the municipal center to Hughes Electric felt longer than usual. Jake's work boots struck the sidewalk with deliberate steps. As he carried his folder of blueprints past the familiar storefronts of Sycamore Lane, the late morning sun had warmed the North Dakota air, but he barely noticed. His mind replayed the confrontation with Frank Barron and the council, analyzing every word and gesture that had led to his dramatic public commitment. Hilltop's main business district stretched for 6 blocks, a collection of brick buildings constructed in the 1950s when the town's population had peaked at nearly 8,000 residents. Now, fewer than 5,000 people called Hilltop home, and several storefronts stood empty despite the reasonable rents. Jake passed Bell Hardware, where Jim Bell was arranging a display of snow shovels in the front window, preparing for the coming winter season. "Morning, Jake," Jim called through the open door. The hardware store owner had inherited the business from his father and maintained the same commitment to personal service that had sustained it for 4 decades. "Heard you caused quite a stir at the council meeting." Jake paused at the store entrance, not surprised that news had already begun spreading through the small town's efficient gossip network. In Hilltop, major events traveled faster than the morning newspaper delivery, carried by residents who shared information over coffee at the Ramos family diner and during chance encounters on Sycamore Lane. "News travels fast," Jake replied, managing a tired smile. "Guess I bit off more than I can chew." Jim stepped outside, wiping his hands on a shop apron stained with grease and paint. The older man's weathered face showed concern, the expression of someone who had watched the community struggle through economic downturns and natural disasters for most of his adult life. Maybe not," Jim said thoughtfully. "Frank Barron's been getting fat contracts around here for years, but that doesn't mean he's the only one who knows electricity. You fixed my store's wiring after that storm 3 years ago, and it's never given me a problem since." Jake appreciated the support, but he knew residential wiring repairs differed significantly from municipal infrastructure design. The technical challenges he had committed to solving involved coordination between multiple systems, regulatory compliance, and performance standards that exceeded anything he had previously attempted in Hilltop. "Thanks, Jim," he said. "I'll probably be needing some supplies in the coming weeks." The hardware store owner nodded, understanding the implication. "You know where to find me, Jake," he said. "Sometimes this town needs someone to shake things up a little." Hughes Electric occupied a converted garage 2 blocks from the town's center. Its metal siding was painted dark blue with white lettering that had faded over the years. Jake had purchased the building 12 years ago, shortly after moving to Hilltop, with his wife, Lisa, and infant son, Tommy. The location provided easy access to residential customers while keeping overhead costs manageable. Inside, the shop reflected the practical needs of a working electrician. Steel shelving lined the walls, holding organized bins of wire, conduit, switches, and outlets. A workbench occupied one corner, cluttered with testing equipment, hand tools, and partially disassembled electrical components. The office area consisted of a metal desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a computer that Jake used primarily for ordering supplies and maintaining customer records. Jake spread his blueprints across the workbench, weighing down the corners with electrical meters and wire strippers. The detailed drawings represented hundreds of hours of work performed during evenings and weekends over the past 8 months. Every circuit diagram had been calculated multiple times. Every component specification was verified against manufacturer data sheets. The foundation of his floodproof design rested on 3 core principles: elevation, isolation, and redundancy. Critical switching equipment would be mounted at least 8 feet above historical flood levels, enclosed in weatherproof housings rated for outdoor industrial use. Ground-level components would feature sealed construction with pressure relief valves to prevent water intrusion. Multiple circuit paths would ensure continued operation even if individual components failed. A knock on the shop door interrupted his study of the blueprints. Through the glass, Jake saw Sarah Vargas, Hilltop's town engineer, holding a steaming coffee cup and looking somewhat hesitant about disturbing him. Sarah was 38 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair and intelligent dark eyes that reflected her analytical nature. She wore jeans and a polo shirt with the town's logo embroidered on the chest. "Come in," Jake called, rolling up the nearest blueprint to make space on the cluttered workbench. Sarah entered the shop, glancing around at the organized chaos of electrical supplies and tools. Her engineering background allowed her to appreciate the systematic arrangement of materials and the quality of Jake's testing equipment, which exceeded what most residential electricians considered necessary. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened at the council meeting," she said, setting her coffee cup on a clear section of the workbench. "Your proposal caught everyone off guard, including me." Jake studied her expression, trying to determine whether she had come to offer support or express concern about his challenge to Frank Barron. Sarah's position as town engineer placed her in an awkward situation, caught between official responsibilities and personal opinions about infrastructure needs. "I probably should have discussed it with you first," Jake admitted. "Municipal electrical systems fall under your department's oversight." Sarah nodded, appreciating his acknowledgement of proper protocol. Her engineering degree from North Dakota State University had prepared her for technical challenges, but small-town politics often proved more complex than structural calculations or drainage system designs. "The council likes to work through established channels," she said diplomatically. "Frank Barron has history with them, successful projects, professional references. You're asking them to trust someone they see as an outsider." Jake felt a flash of irritation at being labeled an outsider after 12 years of living and working in Hilltop. He had rewired houses, installed commercial lighting systems, and performed emergency repairs during storms and blackouts. His work had kept businesses operating and families safe, but apparently that counted for less than Frank's political connections. "I've been fixing electrical problems in this town since before some of those council members were elected," Jake said, his voice sharper than intended. Sarah held up her hand, indicating she understood his frustration. Her role required balancing multiple perspectives while maintaining professional relationships with contractors, officials, and residents who often held conflicting views about municipal priorities. I'm not questioning your skills or commitment, she said, but designing flood-resistant infrastructure involves more than electrical knowledge. There are environmental factors, integration requirements, and long-term maintenance considerations. Jake unrolled one of his blueprints, pointing to a detailed cross-section that showed equipment mounting specifications and drainage provisions. The drawing included elevation measurements, foundation details, and access requirements that demonstrated his consideration of practical implementation challenges. I've accounted for thermal expansion, moisture control, and service accessibility, he said. The design incorporates lessons learned from flood-prone regions across the Midwest, adapted for Hilltop's specific topography and weather patterns. Sarah leaned closer to examine the blueprint, her engineering training evident in how she studied the technical details. Her expression shifted from polite interest to genuine surprise as she recognized the sophistication of Jake's calculations and specifications. These drawings show advanced knowledge of power distribution theory, she said slowly. Where did you learn grid design principles? Jake hesitated, realizing his response would reveal information he had kept private since moving to Hilltop. His decision to work as a local electrician rather than pursue engineering opportunities had been deliberate, motivated by personal circumstances rather than professional limitations. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering from Minnesota, he said quietly, specialized in power systems and grid integration. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. She set down her coffee cup and gave Jake her complete attention, reassessing everything she thought she knew about the quiet electrician who had just challenged the town's established contractor. You're a licensed professional engineer? She asked. Jake shook his head. I never took the PE exam, he said. Came here to raise my son after my wife died, and small-town life didn't require professional credentials. Local electrical work paid the bills and let me be available for Tommy. The revelation explained much about Jake's confidence in proposing municipal infrastructure improvements and his detailed technical drawings. Sarah realized she had been thinking of him as an ambitious tradesman when he actually possessed formal training comparable to her own engineering background. Why didn't you mention your education at the council meeting? She asked. Jake rolled up the blueprint, his movements deliberate and controlled. The question touched on complicated emotions about his decision to abandon a promising engineering career for the sake of his family and his struggle to rebuild his life after Lisa's death from cancer. Because it shouldn't matter, he said. The design either works or it doesn't. Academic credentials don't change the technical merits of the proposal. Sarah understood his perspective, but recognized the political realities of municipal decision-making. Elected officials responded to perceived expertise and professional legitimacy as much as technical competence, especially when approving projects that involved public safety and significant financial investment. Credentials matter to the council, she said. They need confidence that proposed solutions come from qualified sources, and your engineering background would carry weight with Mayor Dean and the other members. Jake considered her advice while organizing his blueprints into a neat stack. The idea of leveraging his educational background felt like a compromise of the principles that had guided his life in Hilltop, where he preferred being judged by his work rather than his degrees. Frank Barron made this personal when he called me an amateur, Jake said. Now it's about proving that innovation and careful analysis can compete with establishment politics and inflated reputations. Sarah recognized the determination in his voice and the challenge. He faced in pursuing his flood-proof grid demonstration. Her position as town engineer would eventually require her to evaluate his system's performance and make recommendations to the council about its viability for broader implementation. If you're serious about this demonstration, you'll need permits for electrical installations and inspections to verify code compliance, she said. I can help navigate the approval process, but the system has to meet all regulatory requirements. Jake appreciated her offer of assistance, understanding that Sarah's support would be crucial for moving forward with his project. Her engineering credentials and official position could provide legitimacy that his technical skills alone might not achieve with skeptical officials. I'll need to identify a suitable location for the demonstration, he said, somewhere in the Basin District where flooding is predictable and the results will be obvious. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through recent photos of flood-affected areas. The Basin District's lower elevation made it particularly vulnerable during spring snowmelt and summer storms, when the Knife River overflowed its banks and inundated streets for several blocks. The old substation on River Street floods every year, she suggested. It's been abandoned since the power company installed the new facility on higher ground. You could use it as a test site without interfering with active infrastructure. Jake nodded, already visualizing how his flood-proof design could be adapted to the abandoned facility. The location would provide an ideal demonstration site, allowing direct comparison between his elevated waterproof installation and the conventional equipment that had repeatedly failed during previous floods. I'll need to survey the site and develop specific installation plans, he said. The demonstration has to be convincing enough to change minds, which means every detail has to be perfect. Sarah finished her coffee and prepared to leave, but paused at the shop door. Her expression reflected both professional interest and personal concern about the challenge Jake had accepted and the potential consequences of failure. "Jake," she said, "you realize what you're risking. If this doesn't work, Frank Barron will make sure everyone knows about it. Your reputation, your business, everything you've built here could be gone." Jake looked around his shop, taking in the organized tools, the steady stream of customer service calls, and the modest but reliable income that had supported his family for over a decade. He understood exactly what he was risking, but he also knew the potential impact of his flood-proof system on the community's safety and resilience. "Sometimes you have to risk what you have to protect what matters most," he said. "This town needs better infrastructure, and if I don't try to provide it, who will?" The abandoned substation on River Street stood like a monument to Hilltop's infrastructure problems. Jake parked his truck beside the chain-link fence that surrounded the facility, noting how rust stains on the concrete pad marked previous flood levels. The old equipment had been removed 3 years ago, leaving only mounting brackets and conduit stubs that told the story of repeated water damage and emergency repairs. Tommy Hughes climbed out of the passenger seat, his 16-year-old frame already approaching his father's height. The teenager wore jeans and a Hilltop High School football jersey, his dark hair damp from the morning practice session. He surveyed the abandoned facility with the skeptical expression that seemed to be his default response to most adult decisions. "This is where you're going to prove you're smarter than everyone else?" Tommy asked, his tone carrying the casual sarcasm that Jake had learned to interpret as genuine interest disguised as teenage indifference. Jake unlocked the gate and stepped onto the concrete pad, measuring distances with his eyes and visualizing how his elevated equipment platform would look once installed. The site offered several advantages: proximity to existing power lines, good drainage for floodwater, and visibility from River Street that would make the demonstration obvious to anyone driving past. I'm going to prove that good engineering can solve problems better than expensive contracts, Jake corrected, pulling a measuring tape from his tool belt. Help me get dimensions for the equipment platform. Tommy took one end of the tape measure and walked to the far corner of the concrete pad. Despite his apparent disinterest, he had inherited his father's methodical approach to technical work and understood the importance of precise measurements for any construction project. 32 feet by 24 feet, Tommy called out, holding the tape steady while Jake recorded the dimension in a small notebook. Jake made notes about existing utility connections and access requirements for his demonstration system. The old substation's layout would allow him to install modern flood-resistant equipment while maintaining comparison points with conventional installation methods that had repeatedly failed at this location. A car door slammed in the street, and Jake looked up to see Frank Barron approaching the fence with two men in expensive suits. The electrical contractor's confident stride and animated gesturing suggested he was conducting some kind of tour or consultation related to municipal projects. "Well, well," Frank called through the fence. "Already planning your failure, Jake." The two suited men flanked Frank as he approached the gate. Jake recognized one as council member Bill Hammond, Patricia Taylor's political ally, who consistently voted with the mayor on infrastructure issues. The other man was unfamiliar, but his tailored clothing and leather briefcase suggested professional importance. "Just surveying the demonstration site," Jake replied evenly, continuing his measurements despite the unwelcome attention. Frank gestured toward the abandoned equipment pad with theatrical dismay, addressing his companions as if Jake couldn't hear every word. His voice carried the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to winning contracts through personal relationships rather than competitive bidding. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Frank said. "Amateur-hour installations that create more problems than they solve. The city deserves professional expertise, not basement workshop experiments." Councilmember Hammond nodded gravely, his expression suggesting serious concern about municipal decision-making processes. His silver hair and conservative suit projected an image of establishment respectability that contrasted sharply with Jake's work clothes and practical equipment. "The liability issues alone should concern any responsible official," Hammond agreed. "Municipal infrastructure requires proven solutions from established contractors." The third man stepped forward, extending his hand toward Frank with the gesture of someone accustomed to deference and immediate attention. His confident bearing and expensive accessories suggested wealth and political influence that exceeded local small-town standards. "Mr. Barron," the stranger said, "Regional Electrical Systems is always looking for reliable local partners who understand both technical requirements and political realities." Jake's attention sharpened at the mention of Regional Electrical Systems, a large contractor based in Minneapolis that specialized in municipal projects across the upper Midwest. The company's involvement suggested stakes higher than simple local politics, potentially involving contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tommy moved closer to his father, sensing tension in the adult conversation, despite not fully understanding the implications. The teenager had grown up watching his father work with quiet competence, and the dismissive tone from the men at the fence bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Dad, who are those guys?" Tommy asked quietly. "Frank's bringing in outside pressure," Jake replied, keeping his voice low while continuing to take measurements. "Trying to make sure the council sees me as a threat to established business relationships." Frank's voice grew louder, clearly intended for Jake's benefit as much as his companions. The problem with letting amateurs experiment with public infrastructure is that failure affects everyone, Frank declared. When that floodproof system doesn't work, who's going to explain to families why their power stayed off for days? Jake felt his jaw tighten, but forced himself to continue working methodically. He had expected opposition from Frank, but the involvement of regional electrical systems suggested a coordinated effort to undermine his demonstration before it could even begin. The regional electrical representative pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of the abandoned substation, documenting the site with the thoroughness of someone planning future development. His attention to detail suggested familiarity with infrastructure assessment and project planning. This location confirms everything we discussed about upgrading Hilltop's electrical capacity, the man told Frank. Our engineers could design a comprehensive system that meets modern standards while providing long-term reliability. Councilmember Hammond seemed pleased by the prospect of professional involvement from a recognized regional contractor. His political instincts favored safe, conventional solutions that would reflect well on his judgment if successful and provide cover if problems developed. Regional Electrical has an excellent reputation with county governments throughout North Dakota, Hammond observed. Their expertise would certainly give the council confidence in any infrastructure investment. Jake realized he was witnessing the formation of a political alliance designed to ensure his demonstration failed to influence municipal decisions, regardless of its technical success. Frank's connections with council members, combined with Regional Electrical's resources and reputation, created formidable opposition to any innovative alternatives. Tommy, Jake said, rolling up his tape measure with deliberate casualness. Let's finish these measurements and get out of here. The teenager helped gather tools and equipment, understanding his father's desire to avoid direct confrontation with the men at the fence. Tommy had inherited enough of his father's analytical nature to recognize when tactical retreat made more sense than immediate engagement. As they walked toward Jake's truck, Frank called out one final comment, calculated to plant doubt about the upcoming demonstration project. Jake, Frank said, you still have time to withdraw that ridiculous challenge before you embarrass yourself publicly. No one expects a local handyman to compete with professional electrical engineers. Jake paused at his truck door, considering whether to respond to Frank's provocation. Tommy watched his father's face, seeing the controlled anger that he recognized from difficult customer situations and bureaucratic frustrations. Frank, Jake said, his voice carrying across the site with quiet conviction. When my system keeps the lights on during the next flood, I'll make sure everyone knows the difference between real engineering and expensive talk. The drive back to Hughes Electric passed in contemplative silence. Tommy stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of Hilltop, processing what he had observed at the abandoned substation and thinking about his father's growing conflict with established business interests. Are you really going to be able to build something better than that big company? Tommy finally asked. Jake considered his son's question carefully, understanding that his answer would influence how Tommy viewed both the upcoming demonstration and his father's capabilities. The teenager deserved honesty about the challenges ahead rather than false reassurance. I'm going to build something that works better for this specific situation, Jake said. Regional electrical design systems for dozens of different communities, but I'm focusing on exactly what Hilltop needs to solve its particular flooding problems. Tommy nodded, satisfied with his father's measured confidence. The teenager had grown up watching Jake approach problems methodically and deliver solutions that worked reliably, even when other approaches had failed. Back at the electrical shop, Jake found Dr. Elena Hunt waiting beside his truck. The 67-year-old retired meteorologist held a manila folder and wore the patient expression of someone accustomed to lengthy waits. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her khaki pants and hiking boots suggested someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Mr. Hughes," Dr. Hunt said, "I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced. I heard about your proposal at the council meeting and wanted to discuss the weather patterns you'll need to consider for your demonstration." Jake unlocked the shop door, intrigued by Dr. Hunt's offer of assistance. The retired meteorologist had moved to Hilltop 5 years ago after a distinguished career with the National Weather Service, and her expertise in regional climate patterns could provide valuable insights for his project. "Any help would be appreciated," Jake said, gesturing for her to enter the shop. "I've been studying historical flood data, but professional weather analysis would strengthen my design calculations." Dr. Hunt opened her folder on Jake's workbench, revealing detailed charts and graphs that tracked precipitation patterns, river levels, and flooding frequency over the past 30 years. Her data showed clear trends in seasonal variation and storm intensity that could inform infrastructure planning. "Hilltop experiences significant flooding approximately every 18 months, she explained, pointing to a graph that showed river level fluctuations. "Spring snowmelt creates the most predictable events, but summer storms can generate flash floods that exceed historical records." Jake studied her charts, noting correlations between weather patterns and the power outages he had experienced since moving to Hilltop. Dr. Hunt's data confirmed his observation that conventional electrical installations failed consistently during high flood events, regardless of their age or maintenance status. "My floodproof design accounts for water levels up to 12 feet above normal river stage," Jake said, showing her his elevation specifications. "Historical data suggests that should cover all recorded flood events plus a safety margin." Dr. Hunt examined his calculations with the analytical eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating weather-related infrastructure risks. Her expression showed growing respect for the thoroughness of Jake's preparation and the sophistication of his technical approach. "Your safety margins are conservative but appropriate," she said. "However, climate trends suggest increasing storm intensity over the coming decades. Have you considered adaptive features that could accommodate changing conditions?" Jake appreciated her forward-thinking perspective and realized that Dr. Hunt could provide valuable credibility for his demonstration project. Her scientific reputation and professional background would carry weight with council members who might dismiss his engineering credentials. "Would you be willing to provide technical consultation for the demonstration?" Jake asked. "Your meteorological analysis could help document the testing conditions and validate the results." Dr. Hunt smiled, clearly pleased by the opportunity to contribute her expertise to a practical problem-solving effort. Her retirement had left her with considerable time and energy that she was eager to direct toward community improvement projects. "I'd be delighted to help," she said. "It's been too long since I worked on a project where good science could make a real difference in people's lives." Tommy had been listening quietly from his position near the office area, impressed despite himself by the professional level of his father's preparation and the quality of support he was attracting. The teenager was beginning to understand that his father's challenge to Frank Barron involved more than local pride or business competition. "Dr. Hunt?" Tommy asked. "Do you really think my dad can build something that works better than what the big companies install?" The retired meteorologist looked thoughtfully at the young man, recognizing his need for reassurance about his father's ambitious undertaking. Her answer would influence not only Tommy's confidence, but also his understanding of how innovation and expertise could challenge established systems. "Your father is approaching this problem with the same scientific rigor I used in weather forecasting," Dr. Hunt said. "Good engineering combined with careful analysis usually produces better results than expensive solutions that ignore local conditions." Jake felt gratitude for Dr. Hunt's support and her ability to explain technical concepts in terms that Tommy could understand and appreciate. Her involvement would strengthen his demonstration project while providing educational value that extended beyond simple infrastructure improvement. The Ramos family diner buzzed with the familiar sounds of breakfast service as Jake entered through the glass door. Its bell announcing his arrival to the morning regulars scattered across red vinyl booths. Maria Ramos looked up from behind the counter, where she was refilling coffee for Pete Callahan, the retired power plant worker who had become a fixture at the corner booth since his wife passed 2 years ago. "Coffee and the usual?" Maria asked, already reaching for the pot and a clean mug. Jake nodded, settling onto a stool at the counter, where he could observe the diner's morning crowd without drawing unnecessary attention. The past week had brought increasing scrutiny from curious residents who wanted to discuss his challenge to Frank Barron, and he preferred quieter moments when possible. Pete Callahan waved him over to the corner booth, his weathered face showing the satisfied expression of someone with interesting information to share. The 71-year-old had worked at the regional power plant for 43 years before retirement, accumulating encyclopedic knowledge about electrical systems throughout the area. "Sit down, Jake," Pete said, gesturing to the opposite side of the booth. "Got something you need to hear about your demonstration project." Jake carried his coffee to Pete's table, noting the serious tone that suggested more than casual conversation. The older man's connections throughout the electrical industry often provided insights into regional politics and business developments that affected local communities. "What's on your mind, Pete?" Jake asked. Pete leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the diner's ambient noise providing natural privacy for their conversation. His expression combined concern with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed being the first to share important information. "Talked to my nephew Eddie yesterday," Pete said. "He's doing plumbing work at the municipal center. Heard Frank Barron meeting with Mayor Dean and that regional electrical fellow. They're planning to fast-track a comprehensive electrical upgrade proposal before your demonstration can influence the council's decision." Jake felt his stomach tighten at the implications. If Frank could secure a municipal contract before the next flood season, the demonstration would become irrelevant, regardless of its technical success. The timeline for proving his system's effectiveness depended on natural weather events that couldn't be scheduled or accelerated. "How fast are they moving?" Jake asked. Pete stirred sugar into his coffee, considering the question with the deliberation of someone who understood bureaucratic processes from decades of experience with regulatory agencies and municipal authorities. "Eddie heard them talking about a special council session next month," Pete said. "Frank's promising regional electrical, can start work immediately after contract approval, finish the whole upgrade before spring flood season. Jake realized the